Okay. I think we have everyone. Welcome. Good evening. Buenas noches. Thank you for joining today's Community Town Hall, the latest in our series to provide families in the Safer College program with resources and information, as well as an opportunity to connect and share expertise to build a better future for students and families. Going forward, we'll be holding these on the third Thursday of each month. Before we get started, just a few things. This discussion will be held in English, but on the screen we will have Spanish language subtitles. We are testing a new technology, so bear with us if you see any hiccups, and thank you for your patience. Also, towards the end, two of our speakers, Joel Santos and Vanessa Fuentes, are going to stay on to answer some questions and highlight some information in Spanish. Just a moment while I just share this in Spanish, and we'll be back in English. Gracias por acompañarnos en nuestra serie de foros virtuales donde compartimos recursos con la comunidad del Safer College Program. Vamos a empezar en inglés, pero en la pantalla verán subtítulos en español. Y en la última parte del foro, dos de nuestros expertos, Joel Santos y Vanessa Fuentes, se quedarán para compartir información en español y contestar sus preguntas. Así que estén pendientes y gracias por su paciencia. Okay. All right, let's get started. So, as many of you know, the NYCHA Rise Safer College program provides a way for all of us, families, schools, neighbors, and partners throughout our city to work together to build a financial foundation for our students' educational futures. I'm Carolina Valencia, Director of Communications and Digital at NYCHA Rise, and I am thrilled to welcome these experts to share how to navigate renters' rights and eviction prevention during the COVID-19 pandemic. Joining us for this town hall from the New York City Department of Social Services is Vanessa Fuentes, who is the Special Advisor to the Deputy Commissioner. From the New York City Housing Authority, NYCHA, Brian Honan, who is Vice President of the Office of Intergovernmental Relations. From Neighborhood Housing Services of Queens, Joel Trinidad Santos, Community Outreach Coordinator and Tenant and Financial Counselor. Before we get started, here with us is a representative from the U.S. Census Bureau, Maria Fernanda Urguelles, who will share more about why it's important we are all counted, especially as we need to ensure more than ever that we get money into our community for schools, jobs, and programs that provide economic assistance, which are critical in times of crises like this pandemic. Fernanda, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'm going to show the slides. So give me one moment. Okay.
Thank you, Carolina, for having us tonight and giving the Census Bureau the opportunity to speak at your town hall today. Thank you, all the other panelists. And my name is Maria Fernanda Urguelles. I'm a partnership specialist for the U.S. Census Bureau, Spanish language specialist on the areas of Corona, East Elmhurst, and Jackson Heights in Queens, particularly. That I work with those areas, but I help the whole region of New York also to bring the message and talk about the important points that I'm going to bring to you today to make sure that everybody gets counted in the U.S. 2020 census. So what is the motto of the 2020 census? Like you see in the slide, is count everyone once, only once, and in the right place. The U.S. Census is conducted every 10 years since the year 1790. It's been there for a long time. And it is in the Constitution. It is our right to be counted by the United States. But it's also important that we understand that as it is our right, it's also our duty, it's our civic duty to take this seriously and make ourselves included and counted. A lot of people think that the census might be an idea of doing this voluntarily, but we should take it as a mandate, like a duty, like it's mandated by the law to do it. And I'm going to explain why, because it's extremely important for our community to be included. So the census is important. It determines the number of seats that each state has in the U.S. House of Representatives and in the Congress. So what happens? 10 years ago in 2010, New York itself lost 3 seats in the House. So we're losing the voice that represents us. we have a voice that go out there and talks about our needs, and the census and the amount of people that live in a state determine how many people, how many voices of our community are going to be allowed to have a seat in the U.S. House of Representatives. Also defines congressional and state legislative districts, school districts, and voting precincts. So it's all depending on the numbers on each area, on each region, that these congressional and state legislative districts and school districts are distributed. That is important. Another, to me, this is the most important and more critical part of it, is determines the annual allocation of over $675 billion, $675 billion in federal funding for the next 10 years. I'm not talking about $675 billion for 10 years. I'm talking each year for the next 10 years. So if we make ourselves count in the census, we are allowing a fair share of this $675 billion each year to come to our community. For what? For programs like Medicaid, SNAP, highway planning, Section 8 housing, really important, special education grants, the insurance for the kids CHIP, the Title I grants, national school lunch programs, WEEK, Head Start, foster care, health center programs. That's just few of them, few of the programs that get funded by federal, right? By federal money, but also for infrastructure. Just the area of Corona, East Elmhurst, Jackson Heights only has one hospital. We do need another hospital in that community, but we can only achieve that and request it if we have the federal funding. And who is going to determine how much money is going to come to each community, to each state? The amount of people that live in that area. So it is really important that we make ourselves count. The census determines representation and also money for our community. The second important point I want to bring today, it is safe. People ask themselves why it's important. I mean, how is my information going to be used? Is it safe for me to answer those questions? I'm going to say, yes, it is. Private information is never published, including name, addresses. None of the information that you put on the census questionnaire can be shared with any other entity. Not with ICE, not with the IRS, not with the police, not with private sectors. No other entity will be allowed to have access to this information. It's secured by federal law, Title 13. Your information is secured by a federal law, Title 13. If any Census Bureau employee violates that law, if that breach of information is broken, we can face up to 5 years in prison or a fine of $250,000 or both. So if you respond to the census via online, you have to rest assured that your information is secured by the maximum and the most high-end system of protection of that information. The same thing over the phone, okay? So your information is protected. And remember, you get counted regardless of your immigrant status. Your immigrant status is not an issue to respond to the census. The third point I want to talk about it is responding to the census is really easy. Right now, we are still allowing people to respond to the census via online. There's 4 ways. The first one, online. People can still respond to the census until September 30th. Online, you can go to www.2020census.gov and you can respond to the census online in 12 different languages. You can do it over the phone. In another slide later on, I'm going to have a list of the phone numbers that you can call and respond to the census over the phone if you cannot do it online. At this point, every household must have received a paper questionnaire. Look through it in your mail. It might be there. If you still don't have it, you can still do it on your phone, on a website, on your phone. Go to the browser, www.2020census.gov, and you can do it online or over the phone. Another way that is going to happen is there's going to be a census taker going to your homes. They are already out there. There's more than 250,000 census takers in the U.S. right now knocking on doors for those who had not responded to the census yet. So try to avoid that visit by going today and do it, okay? So I hope that you understand that why is the census important? The census is important because it means representations in the House. For us, also, it means money directly to our community, funding. The census is safe. Your information is protected by the law. And the census is easy. You can still do it today via online, via phone, the paper questionnaire, or if somebody comes and knock on your door, open the door. Somebody is going to have an ID just like this one. You can be secure that this person is not going to come in your house and is going to be protected themselves and yourself from the spread of COVID because they're going to have a mask and they're not going to come into your house. They can answer the questions outside. Everybody counts. Remember, regardless of your immigrant status, include everybody in your household, particularly your kids. Every kid in the house counts, okay? If you have any questions, I'm going to be hanging out here for a little bit to answer. You can put them on the chat, and I will be more than glad to answer. I'm also going to provide with the phone numbers to call in English and Spanish. This is my phone number. If you ever need to contact me to answer any questions about the census, to ask any questions and you need me to answer any questions about the census, I'm more than glad to take your calls. And that is my email, maria.f.urgelis@2020census.gov. We are also on social media. We have YouTube, Facebook. You can go to www.2020census.gov and you can find a lot of more information there. Thank you so much for having me. And I hope that if you have not done your census yet, you go do it today. And if you have, go and encourage other people in your community to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria Fernanda. It's so important that we get counted, especially when we're dealing with a pandemic or crisis. These type of resources are needed, especially in these times. So it's safe, secure. Reach out to Maria. She's going to stay on in the Facebook comments. You can ask questions or reach out to her directly. But we encourage everyone to do it. So thank you, Maria. Appreciate you coming in here. And we'll get started with our panel. So I think it's, we all have seen the effect of this pandemic and how it continues to affect us and our communities in so many ways. Some manage loss of or reduction of income. Many of us are facing concerns about paying rent and other bills and making difficult decisions about what to prioritize. For most of us, rent could be one of our largest monthly expense. And when our financial circumstances change and they impact our ability to pay our rent on time, it can be very stressful and have real implications. So Joelle, let's start with you. What should people understand about the eviction moratorium? How does it work? What are their rights as tenants, including when they're being harassed? And what are misconceptions about evictions?
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much. So to get started, what an eviction, let's start with what is an eviction, right? Since it's a thing that it's a topic that we see we're seeing in the media all the time. It's constantly thrown out there, but what exactly is it? So essentially what an eviction is, it's the process that has to take place to get for a landlord to obtain a property or payment for a property from a tenant. So there is currently in place what is an eviction moratorium. So there have been some changes as to how these typically take place. And there were some initiatives that were put in place by the governor to ensure that people stay in their homes, given the fact that a lot of us, a lot of our members of our community have lost their source of income or seen a reduction in their source of income, especially with unemployment benefits ending at the end of last month. So some of the things that the key points of the eviction moratorium: housing court for the purposes of evictions is closed until October 1st. If you were in an eviction proceeding before that, it's been pushed back to after that date. Landlords and tenants of residential and commercial properties, you can enter into a written agreement to make use of your security deposit. to pay for, rent due or any of the arrears. Just important that it has to come at the request of the tenant. So you as the tenant, if you're the tenant of the household, you have to request it to your landlord. Your landlord can't just call you and say, hey, listen, looks like you haven't paid rent. Let's make use of that security deposit. No. There has to be a written agreement, and you must pay that back within 90 days. So just keep that in mind, that even though if you decide to access those funds, there's still the responsibility of paying that back within 3 months. Any petitions filed in the court, I believe some petitions were filed at some point. They all got pushed back to October 1st. And just note that the part for emergency cases does remain open. So if, let's say, you're a tenant and you can, you need services, you're being illegally evicted or illegally locked out, there are housing code violations, landlords still have to comply with the standard of living during this situation. So the court is still open for that. Evictions do not fall under emergency cases. So just even though the court is open for those, and if they're not going to be able to label your eviction as an emergency case.
We have, I want to make sure that you have the right sites here. So
okay, no problem. Yeah, that's the right one. Thank you.
Okay, perfect.
So marshals can execute warrants of eviction. So again, any warrants of eviction can't be even if they had one at some point, can't be executed on or after October 1st. And it's important to remember that during these times and any time in general, property owners, landlords, or managing agents cannot discriminate based on any of the protected categories. Some of the most common: household composition, age, race, sex, religion, source of income, immigration status. There's also been a category added to include positive COVID-19 diagnosis. So keep that in mind, that they can't make you, enter the building through a separate entrance. They can't restrict your use of certain facilities just because you tested positive or had a member of your household test positive for COVID-19. So that's in generally what happens, and that's what's going on in terms legislatively. And if you could just pull up the eviction flowcharts, just so that I can show people that I'm not going to go into detail of this, but this is what I mean when an eviction that needs to take place, and that in the event that you are at risk, an eviction is a long drawn out process. It's not something that happens overnight. It's not like you owe rent now today and tomorrow there's a marshal knocking at your door. This is the process that has to happen. Evictions can happen for one of two reasons: non-payment, where here the only issue is money. You pay, you stay. The other one is a holdover, where your landlord is requesting to take possession of your property. Again, they have their own nuances, but the purpose of me showing you these illustrations here is that it's a process and it's multiple steps. It's not, it's not something that's going to happen overnight. So just keep that in mind. Each eviction is different, but you will be given time. The purpose of it all, and to summarize, is for you to vacate, be connected to the resources to remain, or be given the proper time for you to vacate that unit without placing you in a homeless situation. So it is, there is a lot of negative connotation to when it comes to that word, but in some cases it actually can be what connects you to the resources and, gives you the time in order to be properly placed or find suitable housing. So it is a right. It's not something that should be, that's not necessarily the evil process that a lot of people make it out to be. And
do you want to go into the tenant rights?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
So again, like I had said before, the right to an eviction. Who qualifies to the right for the right to an eviction? Anybody who's been living in any property in the state of New York for more than 30 days, independent of rental payment status, lease agreement status, or any of the protected categories. Again, anybody, if you can prove that you've been occupying that space for more than 30 days, you have the right to an eviction process. And just to, since we're on the topic of rights, just remember that during these times and just in general, there are certain rights that you have as a tenant, independent of your immigration status or your rental payment status, which is the right to an acceptable standard of living, the right to live free of discrimination, the covenant of quiet enjoyment, which pretty much is a fancy way, or the federal government's way of saying you have the right to quietly enjoy your premises without interruptions, and source of income discrimination. So these were some protections that were enacted in 2019, which pretty much states that your landlord has to accept any money towards rent, independent of what source it comes from, whether it be from government subsidies. Again, there's some landlords that may be exempt, but for the most part, most landlords have to accept rental payment in whichever form the tenant is able to provide it. So I think that covers about everything that I had for this question. Can't hear you.
There's children playing in the background, so I'm trying to manage the mute. Thank you. I think this was helpful to understand what our rights are as tenants, what does the eviction moratorium mean, what that process looks like, that things are not going to happen overnight. There's a whole process that takes place. So Vanessa, let's talk about some of the economic assistance that is available. What are the resources, such as emergency cash and the grants, like one-shot deals that can potentially assist a family with covering their bills, including rent? And what should people keep in mind when considering and applying for these?
Yeah, thank you. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So one of the things that we provide at HRA, the Human Resources Administration, is assistance with paying back rent and utility arrears. So if people have lost their income, or maybe their income has been reduced because of COVID or because of any other situation, HRA can help individuals and families catch up with the rent or the utilities if they owe money to utility companies. And the way that somebody applies for that type of assistance is online. So if they go on Access HRA, so people can just Google that, it's called Access HRA. They create an application, they can apply for those emergency grants to pay for back rent. They can apply for an emergency grant to pay utility arrears. They can apply for a cash grant to be able to buy toiletries. They can also apply for food stamps or SNAP benefits. And they can apply for ongoing cash assistance as well, which is a grant that individuals and families receive every 2 weeks from HRA. They can also apply for Medicaid if they are a senior citizen or somebody with disability. They can apply for Medicaid through HRA. But if they are not a senior citizen or have a disability, they will have to apply for Medicaid through the New York State of Health. So those are the type of assistance that HRA provides. And again, all the applications are available online. They can create an account and apply, so they don't have to leave their homes. But for those individuals that are not able to apply online because either they don't have access to a computer or the internet, they can still go to an HRA center. So there's one center open in every location, and they can apply in person with a worker. If that is not an option for many people, if they don't want to go to a center because of COVID, we have what we call home visits. So we will send somebody to the person's house, and we will bring with us an application or sometimes an iPad and help the individual people apply for this type of assistance. So there are different things that individuals or different channels by which individuals can apply for rental assistance, SNAP benefits, or Medicaid from the Human Resources Administration. Now, the process for applying, it's, I think, pretty simple. So you create an application, you apply. If you're applying for a one-shot deal for the emergency grant to pay for back rent or utility arrears, those applications are processed anywhere between 2 to 4 weeks. A lot of the times we look at whether or not there is an imminent risk of eviction. So if somebody is in housing court right now or has a notice of eviction, we obviously treat those applications with a sense of urgency. If there's not, if the landlord has not started court proceedings, then we just let that application run through the regular process. For SNAP benefits, that application process takes anywhere from a week to 30 days. If the applicant doesn't have a lot of financial resources on hand or on a bank account, they can qualify for what is called expedited SNAP benefits. And those benefits are issued within 5 days from the time that they apply for those benefits. As far as ongoing cash assistance, that application does take 45 days to be processed. So if you apply today, even if you qualify, you won't be getting your benefits until 45 days from the time that you apply. So the sooner you apply for those benefits, the better, because these applications take, in some cases, a little bit of time. And it's not because we don't want to process them faster, but there are federal regulations that prevent us from activating and issuing benefits quickly to families, which is why the immediate grants are available in the one-shot deals, and those are processed more quickly.
Vanessa, just one more thing around, thank you for sharing all of that.
Sure.
But what are some things to keep in mind, for example, if they do request the one-shot deal grant, and what should they keep in mind as you know, you look to evaluate the totality of their income?
That's a great question. So when somebody applies for the emergency grant to pay for back rent, we look at whether the person has the ability to pay for their rent going forward. So if I owe $3,000 right now or $5,000, but I have some type of income, or maybe I just lost my job, or I don't have any income because of COVID, but I do have a friend or a family member that is willing to support me financially and contribute towards the rent. And I recently maybe applied for unemployment insurance benefits, or maybe SSI or SSD, or some type of benefit or income that is going to be available down the road. Those applications are more likely to be approved than somebody who has no income or won't have any income in the foreseeable future. Of course, there's not a hard and fast rule for this type of things. And so the best thing that you can do is to apply, because we look at each individual application individually, and we look, as you said, Carolina, at the totality of the case and the person's situation. We don't disqualify anyone just because there's no income in the household. And another thing that can increase the chances that somebody would be approved is if they are already getting either SNAP benefits or maybe Medicaid or ongoing cash assistance, or if recently or in the past 3 or 6 months they have received a HEAP grant to pay for heat or fuel. So if they have received one of those grants, it's more than likely that they're going to be approved. Another thing that I think it's important is that if somebody is living in NYCHA housing or has a Section 8 voucher, obviously that's considered affordable housing. HRA would work with NYCHA and will try to prevent those evictions from happening, because we don't want somebody to lose their spot in NYCHA housing or Section 8.
Thank you. These are really important reminders and resources to keep in mind. And we'll share more of the phone numbers and who can assist with sort of navigating these applications. And thank you for bringing up NYCHA or the public housing. And I want to go turn it over to Brian to talk about that piece in terms of applying for rent adjustment. And these are for families that live in Queensbridge, Ravenswood, Astoria, Woodside houses, and those that receive Section 8. What is the process to apply? What are the requirements? Any misconceptions like timing that perhaps people are not aware of that they should know about?
Sure. Thanks so much, Carolina. And I really appreciate the opportunity to present and to have this conversation, because it's really an important one. COVID has been a tremendous stress on the city and the country, and even more so for people in communities of color. in NYCHA, even before there was a federal moratorium or a state moratorium on evictions, we declared a moratorium on evictions right away. So the moratorium that we were talking about earlier also applies to public housing residents. So while there is a pause on evictions, that does not mean that there's a pause on rent. So if you live in NYCHA or any other type of housing, you still are required to pay rent on the first of the month, every month. What makes public housing different than any other type of housing is that families are only required to pay 30% of their income towards rent. So the way rent is figured out in public housing is all the income in your household, and then you get 30%. And you know, with some exemptions that you may qualify for, you come to a final number. Now, if your income goes up, your rent would also go up. But in this case, what we wanted to talk about is families whose income goes down. And it doesn't only have to be related to COVID, but we know COVID has hit the city particularly hard economically, and a lot of people are seeing loss of income. So if anyone in your family, it doesn't even necessarily have to be you, it could be your husband, it could be your wife, it could be your adult child. If they lose income and they're on the lease, you can apply for what we call the Emergency Rent Reduction Program. And what this does is it allows you to reduce your rent level to a level that is affordable to you. Now, you don't have to lose your job altogether, so your boss doesn't have to say, you know, you're fired. But if you were laid off, you still qualify for this program, or even if your hours were cut. So if you're working normally 40 hours a week, and now your boss says, well, I'm sorry, I can only keep you on for 20 hours a week, that is a loss of income, and that would make you qualify for this program. So this is not a new program for NYCHA, but we've made it a lot easier. The way it used to work is you would contact us. We would say, okay, show us proof that you lost income. It would take about 2 months to file, and then we would get you a retroactive credit. Now we are doing this, and HUD has allowed us to do this. It is called a self-certification program. All you have to do is tell us that you lost income, what day you lost income, where you live, and what your current rent is, and the amount that you lost. And there are 3 easy ways to do this. You don't even have to leave your apartment, in fact, to do this. You can do it online using the self-service portal, and that address is selfserve.nycha.info. You can call the customer contact center, which is 718-707-7771, and then you hit option number 5. And on the customer contact center, we have operators who speak English, who speak Spanish, or you can use the language line, and we have in any possible language that is spoken in New York City or practically anywhere. The third way you want to do it, and if you want to, I want to see somebody in person, I want to talk to somebody in person, you can go to your management office and do this. They will ask you to fill out a form. You fill out the form, you give it to them, and I encourage people to do this immediately. If something happens and you're informed by your employer that there's going to be a change in your income in the morning, try to do this in the afternoon, the same exact day. Don't put it off. There's no reason to put it off. The moment you do it that's the time when you qualified for the program, and you will be given a retroactive credit moving forward. Many of your neighbors have done this. In Queensbridge, 344 families have successfully applied for the rent hardship program. In Ravenswood, 172 families have successfully applied and qualified for the program. And in Astoria, 188 families have. So I'm really happy to say that people who live in the Queensbridge, Ravenswood, and Astoria neighborhoods are taking advantage of this program. But I'm sure there are other folks out there who either don't know about it or maybe feel like, I'll do it next month. Don't wait, just do it now. So that's our program. Happy to take questions, and I'll stick around for the rest of the program. But really, thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Brian. And just one more thing, I think is just a reminder of for those families that perhaps if they have concerns about getting evicted, maybe share just a little bit about how that process works.
Sure. So once again, evictions are, off for any reason whatsoever. There is a moratorium that extends into October. But that doesn't mean evictions are off forever, right? It is very rare that families get evicted in NYCHA, and you do have the right to a hearing. But our hearing office is closed right now. But as I said earlier, just because there's an eviction moratorium, that doesn't mean there's a rent moratorium. And so please continue to pay your rent. You may hear people say, I've heard so many rumors on the street that rent isn't required at this time. They stop paying rent. It's okay. It's okay. It is not okay. You need to pay rent. What you definitely also need to do is not pay any higher than you need to either. So if you can have your rent adjusted, please do so.
Thank you. Thanks, Brian. And now that we know about these resources that Vanessa has shared, and also the information that Brian just shared about from NYCHA, let's talk about more how we can prioritize bills. And Joe, I want to turn it back to you. Could you share with families how they can consider all these resources in context with the income they have, and what is the immediate step, like what kind of budget they should be thinking about? And I'll pull up your slides here.
Okay, no problem. So thank you again, putting on now my financial counselor hat. So when it comes to, as Brian has mentioned a few times, again, the moratoriums that there are on evictions and other services are kind of like suspending their collection procedures and their policy cancellations. But as he said, the responsibility to pay still remains, right? Rent is still due. Your utilities are still due. Any sort of monthly obligation that you had prior to COVID is still due. At best, through either legislative or internal company policies, at best what's being offered right now is deferment. So they're just pushing it back until later, but at some point that money is going to have to be paid. So it's always good to start, so if you're one of those who have been fortunate enough to not have your income sources impacted due to COVID-19, you should continue to make your payments as you normally would. For those again, for those again who have been impacted, then there's several things that you can do. I think if you can go back to the previous slide. So some of the things that you can do if you're in this situation is identifying what your essential expenses are. Again, shelter, food should be top priority. If you're a homeowner or a tenant, you should contact whoever you pay mortgage or rent to see if they offer any sort of hardship assistance. Community food pantries are offering services to those in need. When it comes to your creditors, when it comes to creditors that you have or those monthly obligations for services or for credit, contact them and see if you can either push back your due dates or change or make any sorts of arrangement. Don't just stop a contact or don't reach out or stop reaching out just because you don't have the money to pay at this time. It's best that they're in the know and that they're working with you to avoid any penalties or any fees or any issues going forward. Try thinking about eliminating the things that you can live without. If you can put things on pause like gym memberships, premium cable channels, other sorts of subscription services that you may have, consider trying to put those on pause for the moment. Try to save money on debt by finding options to lower interest rates and reduce monthly payments, whether it be, kind of switching providers, reaching out to the different financial services that you've already accessed, and try to see what assistances they can offer and consider the options that they provide to you. Again, federal student loans through the CARES Act, I believe, were those were deferred. I believe now with the new federal regulations, I believe they were pushed back until the end of the year. Not at the time the slide was made, it was up until September 30th. If we could do the next slide. So again, that's just in terms of thinking and prioritizing the expenses that you have. Again, create a short-term spending plan, understanding income and assets. Again, some people qualified for some government stimulus. There's talk about other stimulus that's coming on the way. So you can also, just pay attention to your local networks and to follow up on those conversations. If you're able to, and if your situation allows it, and if you're comfortable with it, find a temporary job providing some sort of essential services, or a lot of essential service provider like food delivery, meal delivery services are currently still hiring. Look to liquid assets first, so drawing on cash and savings account. But also if you decide to make use of any savings account or any resources that you have, also make a plan not only to use them but to replenish them. So if you took $1,000 from your savings or $2,000 or whatever it is, try to make a plan to see when you're going to pay that back, so that you're not just taking the funds out and then it's just we'll get to it when we get to it. Like, have a plan that you can stick to so that if the money is needed in the future, you still have access to it. And again, working out a budget of what your expenses are and doing all the things that I said in the previous slide to determine exactly how much are you going to need from your savings. Don't just go and say, well, let's take out all of this and whatever I don't use, I'll just hold on to it. Just make sure that how much you're going to need to cover your expenses, and make a plan for you to pay that back going forward. When your income resumes or where your situation sees some sort of financial improvement. And I think the next slide. And again, making use of financial options, make appropriate use of credit. Consider if credit is feasible, not using it for the short terms. Remember, interest rates are still going for most credit products. So just be mindful that it might be, you don't have to pay for it immediately out of your cash now, but it may cost you more going down the line. Credit cards, home equity lines of credit, and personal loans may be an option in your situation. Just make sure that you analyze that, and take some time to look into what the penalties are, as well as for some of those who have retirement assets, this should be a last resort. And just be very mindful that if you tap into like a pension, an IRA, or an investment account, or any sort of that of account of that nature, that there can be penalties for early withdrawals, and there can be fiscal or tax implications. So it might be taxable income that you have to pay taxes on at the end of the year. Again, we don't necessarily know what the fiscal code is going to look like for 2020, but again, just some things to keep in mind. I think you're muted. There you
doing
go.
that. Just a reminder. Any questions you all have, please put them in the comments. We're looking at them. I know that there's also there's still some job losses happening among our community, and we have a parent that has shared that they at his workplace they closed for a few weeks because they lost their liquor license. So the budget, making sure that you're thinking about your budget in these times, the way Joel shared, are really key. I want to remind the families that we're going to share this information in Spanish. So vamos a compartir esto en español. Si se quedan unos minutos, estaremos compartiendo esto en español. So before we wrap up, I think Vanessa would be a good reminder. I know you shared this already, but in the context of the budget and, the resources that are available, I want to put up the information of where they can access, if you want to talk some more about that. So where people can reach out, what are the things that, I know you shared that earlier, but just as a reminder that as they're thinking about their income and what's available, what the resources are that they can look into.
Yes, and I will say that for families who live in mixed household status, so that's how we call them here at HRA, but it's basically a household where maybe the children are US citizens, or maybe they have a green card, and maybe their parents or one parent is either undocumented or their immigration status has not been it's sort of like still in the air, like it hasn't, there's not a resolution. Those those families are still eligible to receive benefits from HRA, even if the parents, or even if there's one person in the household who is not documented, or whose immigration status, again, is still unclear. And the way it works is that when they apply for public benefits, the benefits would be issued to the children, but the parents would sort of like claim them. The parents are just sort of like the payee. So I think it's important to, to mention that. And if families are not sure what that would mean to their immigration status, like if they're looking for immigration relief right now, there's the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs is working with CUNY, with the City University of New York, to provide free legal counsel. So if families are interested in applying for public benefits, including the one-shot deal, and they're not sure how, if at all, that's going to impact their immigration status now or in the future, they can call this number. It's I think people can see it now. It's 1-800-354-0365. And they can ask to speak with an attorney, and that attorney will provide free legal counsel to individuals around any public benefits, around DACA, and any other type of immigration services for free. And right now they're providing those services via phone because of COVID. But in the past, we used to sit down with our clients and interview them and work with them on a more face-to-face level. Joel mentioned in the very beginning, I think, of the presentation, that landlords are required to take money even if it comes from places like HRA. If your landlord is not accepting money that comes from the welfare office, from HRA in this case, that is considered under the law discrimination. And we actually have a source of income discrimination unit here at HRA. We have attorneys who can work with you to make sure that your landlord is not discriminated against you by refusing to take the money that comes directly from HRA. Because if you apply for cash assistance and you qualify, your landlord can receive a grant every 2 weeks. They'll get a check every 2 weeks from HRA. But if they refuse to cash those checks because they come from the public welfare office, that is considered discrimination. And so we have that unit to be able to advise you on what the next steps would be. And our attorneys would actually engage the landlords to make sure that they know what the law is. Another resource that I would like to share is HRA's Office of Civil Justice, which provides free legal counsel and attorneys to individuals and families who are in housing court right now, or who are being sued by the landlords because the landlords have started either evictions due to non-payment or holdovers, which is a completely different thing. We have attorneys that they don't work for HRA, but we have contracted with different organizations to provide attorneys and legal counsel to those families. And so the way you access an attorney is by calling 311 or the number that is on that screen, which is 718-557-1379. And there's also an email address that you can just email, and you can say, hey, right now my landlord has started eviction proceedings and I need an attorney, and somebody will get in contact with you and identify an attorney that can represent you in housing court proceedings.
Thank you, Vanessa.
Mhm.
And Joel, do you want to share the resources that, let me just pull it up for you. I think it's this one,
Yes,
some
so-
legal resources.
So thank you. So
Wanna
yeah,
talk
so I mean, and some of these are maybe, as Vanessa previously mentioned, available through HRA, but these are just some legal resources for tenants who are facing situations of discrimination, evictions, or anything like that. Unfortunately, with this situation, we've seen landlords, go from regularly, who would regularly collect their rent by sending notices, to actually physically coming down and knocking on the doors of tenants, threatening, making all sorts of threat in regards to immigration status. A lot of horror scenarios. There's a lot of good, but there's also some bad. So you can reach out to these organizations to kind of like get some legal assistance, or just to answer questions. Even if you have any doubts, you say, hey, listen, my landlord did this. I get emails I used to get an email every week from the managing agent. Now I get a daily reminder. Is that allowed? Anything any doubts that you have, you can reach out to these hotlines and just ask them questions about your tenant's rights. Most of these are attorneys, so they can kind of give you in a more legal context, instead of a more general, as I provided to you today. What you can do, and what actions, and how an action from your landlord, and the response that you should give as a tenant to enforce your rights. And again, to report housing discrimination, you can always, the Human Rights Commission, call it through 311. And there are several different hotlines, as you see on the screen. The Catholic Migration Services is a really good one. Housing Court Answers Online is also a very good one. So again, that's just a number of resources that you can call and just take down their contacts. Again, just if you don't necessarily need them now, but if you may need them in the future. Again, it's just useful information for any tenant in general to have.
And we've been putting them in the comments, the phone numbers and the emails, so you have them there. I also want to share the New York NYLAG's information. If you visit their website, NYLAG, nylag.org/hotline, you can call and leave a message, and they'll get back to you within 2 business days. It's 929-356-9582. And I also just want to bring up, before we switch to Spanish and close the English, just a reminder on the NYCHA the NYCHA info that Brian had shared. So any questions that you have, let us know, and we'll get them answered. And so with that, thank you all for joining. As a reminder, before we switch to Spanish, and I want to thank Brian for joining us. Vanessa and Joel are going to stay on. Our next town hall is going to take place next month on Thursday, September 17th at 6 p.m. Just a reminder for the Safer College Program families, if you haven't had a chance yet to complete the foundational building blocks, please consider taking the next steps. During these unprecedented times, the building blocks are steps you can take today to support your child's future. So contact us with any questions. The NYC Kids Rise team is available to connect. Here's our information. So you can call us at 833-543-7473. Our team speaks multiple languages, so give us a call, and we can tell you where you are in the program. You can also email us at info@nyckidsrise.org. So thank you, Brian. I appreciate the time with sharing the information that you did around for NYCHA. And we're going to switch to Spanish. So un momento que ya vamos a empezar en español. Ok. Entonces yo creo que muchos de ustedes ya vieron más o menos a través de la pantalla la información que se compartió, pero Joel y Vanessa van a compartir una versión resumida sobre esto. Y si tienen preguntas, por favor, pónganlas en los comentarios para poder contestarlas. Ellos van a hacer unos minutos más para poder proveerles esta información. Así que Joel, empecemos con lo que explicaste, un resumen breve de lo que es y no es el proceso de eviction, de desalojo, y recordemos cuáles son los derechos de los inquilinos.
Ok, gracias. Entonces, sí, en forma resumida, lo que es un proceso de desalojo es prácticamente el proceso legal mediante el cual un casero retoma o pide posesión de una propiedad ya por motivo de concepto de falta de pago o simplemente solicitando el espacio físico que está ocupando el inquilino. Entonces, ahora mismo hay lo que se llama un moratorio con respecto a lo que es los desalojos. Entonces, cualquier proceso de desalojo ha sido aplazado hasta el 1 de octubre. Durante este tiempo también permite hacer uso de los depósitos de seguridad. El inquilino tiene que, para hacer pago de la renta, el inquilino es que tiene que iniciar esta solicitud. Entonces, por ejemplo, el casero no se lo puede imponer, usted tiene que pedirlo como inquilino de hacer uso de su depósito. Si elige hacer uso de su depósito, simplemente tiene que también tener pendiente que tiene que reponer esos fondos en 90 días. Entonces, no es simplemente usar el dinero, tiene que entrar en un plan con su casero para reponer ese dinero, ya que aunque hay un moratorio en lo que es el proceso de desalojo, no hay un moratorio en la responsabilidad de pagar la renta. Entonces, la gran mayoría de la renta, al igual que todos los compromisos financieros que teníamos antes de esta situación, siguen en pie. Lo que se está ofreciendo, como quien dice en este momento, es más aplazamiento que cualquier otra cosa. Entonces, siempre tengan eso pendiente, que aunque no posiblemente tengan que pagar ahora, más adelante, esas responsabilidades fiscales sí van esas responsabilidades económicas sí van a tener que cumplirse tarde o temprano. Entonces, creo que hablamos de eso. Hablamos también de lo que es con respecto a sus finanzas, de hacer prioridad, hacer uso de los diferentes servicios públicos, como había mencionado acá, y sentarse a establecer un presupuesto, un plan de gastos, no simplemente cubriendo los gastos necesarios, sino haciéndolo con cierta clase de planificación para saber qué recursos tiene que accesar, ya sea recursos propios, como ahorros, inversiones, planes de retiro, también haciendo uso de los beneficios públicos y también opciones de crédito y productos financieros. Entonces, es como quien dice, hacer lo que tenemos que hacer, pero hacerlo de una manera coordinada.
Sí, yo creo que es importante recordar que tal vez como uno siempre mira hacia pagar la renta, ¿no? Y que ese es el gasto más grande, que hay otros recursos, y eso es lo que quiero que Vanessa hable sobre eso, porque tal vez los recursos que ustedes puedan aplicar y también teniendo pendiente que el estatus de sus hijos puede ayudar en ese aspecto. Puede ayudar a cubrir esos gastos más pequeños para que ustedes puedan aplicar los fondos a gastos más grandes como pagar la renta. Entonces, Vanessa, ¿quieres hablar un poquito sobre eso?
Sí, claro. Pues yo trabajo para la ciudad, el Departamento de Recursos de NYCHA, que provee los beneficios públicos aquí en la ciudad de Nueva York. Mi agencia provee los beneficios de los cupones de alimento. Nosotros proveemos también lo que es el Medicaid y también proveemos asistencia de emergencia. Es como un préstamo que la ciudad, que mi agencia le hace a las familias o a las personas que se han retrasado con la renta, con el alquiler de la renta, o que no han podido pagar, en este caso, los recibos de luz o los recibos de gas. Entonces, si mis ingresos son limitados porque mis horas han sido reducidas o porque he perdido mi trabajo o en realidad no me alcanza el dinero que tengo de ingreso, muchas familias, como lo habíamos mencionado, muchas veces le dan prioridad a la renta porque pues obviamente todo el mundo necesita un lugar donde vivir. Pero si estas personas fueran a aplicar a los servicios, a los beneficios públicos que mi agencia provee, entonces ellos estarían ahorrando ese dinero que a lo mejor ahorita están utilizando para comprar comida o para pagar otras cosas. Nosotros podemos proveerle esos beneficios, entonces el dinero para comprar comida ya no tiene que salir de los ingresos que ellos están teniendo en la casa. Cada persona aquí en la ciudad de Nueva York puede recibir el máximo de $194 al mes en cupones de alimento, Entonces, si multiplicas eso por 3 o por 4, sí, ya es una buena cantidad de dinero que pueden estar recibiendo mes con mes de mi agencia. Había mencionado anteriormente que hay familias que se preocupan por el estatus migratorio que ellos tienen y tal vez en su casa haya ya sea un padre de familia o los dos padres de familia o incluso tal vez a lo mejor uno de sus hijos es indocumentado o a lo mejor la situación migratoria no está resuelta completamente. Esas familias existe la posibilidad de que califiquen para nuestros servicios, pero nosotros no podemos saber hasta que no veamos la aplicación en nuestro sistema y hasta que no tengamos acceso a los documentos que ellos que ellos nos tienen que proveer. En este caso, siempre les pedimos a las familias que nos proveen copias de su pasaporte, de su nación, de donde vienen, y les sacamos nosotros fotocopias para ver cuándo fue que entraron al país, cuándo fue que salieron, si tienen alguna clase de visa o si son víctimas de violencia doméstica o tal vez son refugiados o están pidiendo asilo político. O sea, la situación migratoria puede ser muy compleja y pues en realidad aquí nosotros en la oficina tenemos una abogada que revisa esos casos y ella es la que determina qué clase de asistencia pública estas familias pueden calificar. Y si los hijos son ciudadanos americanos y los padres no lo son, los hijos califican para los servicios públicos o los beneficios públicos de mi agencia, aunque no necesariamente los padres de familia su situación migratoria sea resuelta. Entonces, como lo decías, Carolina, hay cosas que podemos hacer para tener a lo mejor un ingreso extra, se podría decir, en este caso de la ciudad, para poder ayudarnos con todos los gastos que tenemos en la casa.
Gracias, Vanessa. Y eso, sé que a veces hay mucho miedo, son tantas crisis, son tantas cosas que se está pasando. Entonces, ahora vuelvo a poner los números para que se informen sobre la ayuda y los recursos que existen, especialmente en este momento. Entonces, eso porque hay que aprovechar lo que sí está disponible. Son tiempos muy diferentes. Tenemos una pregunta de Flor que menciona, y creo que Joel, esto sería para ti. ¿Qué podemos hacer si el casero nos pidió el apartamento, nos dio solo 2 meses para salir, no le debemos nada mes con mes, le hemos estado pagando, ya estamos viviendo 11 años en el apartamento?
Ok, entonces, en esta situación en particular, como tú me había dicho, cuando cualquier persona que esté ocupando un espacio físico por más de 30 días, tiene lo que es el derecho al desalojo. Entonces, ahora mismo el casero es la primera parte del proceso, es como quien dice una solicitud del casero, no tiene que venir directamente de la corte. A veces lo hacen verbal, pero para tener validez tiene que ser por escrito, dejándole saber de que el casero ha decidido terminar con su inquilinato y pidiendo posesión de la propiedad. Por ley le tiene que dar 30 días, en este caso le está dando 60, eso está a opción del casero, pero el mínimo es 30. Entonces, en este caso ya lo que procederá es, si llegan los 2 meses y ustedes no han dejado la propiedad, entonces ya el casero llevará esto como que es comprobando de que ya trató de hacer el desalojo por su cuenta, llevará para hacer el proceso de corte. Y ahora, más allá de ahí, no sé exactamente cómo podría proceder, ya que no sé si él va a tratar de hacer lo que es, hay muchos caseros que no saben que pueden hacer un proceso de holdover solicitando la propiedad. Muchos de ellos tratan de no aceptar renta y hacer un non-payment, porque creen que es la única opción que tienen para desalojar a un inquilino. Entonces ya ahí, dependiendo del desalojo que hagan, el proceso puede variar. Entonces, si es non-payment y ustedes pagan, el proceso se cae y queda, y ya el casero tiene que hacer lo que se llama es el holdover. Ahora, si hace el holdover desde el principio, entonces ya ahí en la corte ustedes negociarán los términos y las condiciones bajo la cual ustedes entregarán esa propiedad. Y la corte se asegurará de que ustedes tengan el tiempo y conecten a los posibles recursos, algunos del Departamento de Recursos Humanos, para encontrar una propiedad nueva. Entonces, ¿qué pueden hacer en este momento? Por ahora, tranquilos de que no tienen que hacer nada, no tienen que responder a ningún proceso de corte. En caso de que el casero quiera, ya sin haber pasado por un proceso de corte, quiera venirle a cambiar candados o negar acceso a la propiedad, tienen que llamar a la corte o llamar al 911 desde el lugar de los hechos y reportar de que están siendo desalojados ilegalmente. Y si pueden, de nuevo, tomando como que dice iniciativa proactiva, pueden empezar a buscar vivienda, pero ya no con tanta prisa de que tienen que salir dentro de los 2 meses estipulados, o que si no encuentran en esos 2 meses, van a tener a alguien en la puerta al día 61, como quien dice, sacando sus efectos a la calle. Eso no procede de esa manera. Entonces tienen tiempo, pueden hagan uso de los diferentes recursos que habíamos mencionado anteriormente, y puede llamar a los números de teléfonos de las otras entidades, de Catholic Migration o cualquiera de ellas, para que le puedan asesorar más paso por paso cuál sería, cómo procedería su proceso.
Gracias, Joel. Y tenemos otras preguntas. Quiero solo un momento mencionar los números. Creo que no sé si eran algunos de estos.
Sí, esos eran los números. Está ahí el de Catholic Migration. Ellos ofrecen servicios de inmigración y también tienen un departamento de una línea laboral, y también es la línea directa al programa de derechos de inquilino. Y Housing Court Answers también son otras entidades que tienen información con respecto a lo que es a lo que son las diferentes leyes y los diferentes recursos disponibles para los inquilinos.
Gracias, Joel. Y hay una pregunta, Vanessa, si puedes contestar eso sobre lo de Access NYC.
Sí. Bueno, anteriormente también había una pregunta de una persona que se estaba preguntando que no ha recibido los $420 del PEBT. Desafortunadamente, el PEBT no está siendo administrado por HRA. Esos beneficios vienen directamente del Estado. Utilizan un sistema que nosotros tenemos, al que nosotros tenemos acceso, y podemos ver si esos beneficios han sido mandados a las familias. Lo que el Estado hizo con los beneficios de PEBT para las familias es que lo dividieron en 3 partes. Las primeras personas o familias que recibieron los beneficios de PEBT fueron personas que están recibiendo beneficios públicos de HRA, que están recibiendo cupones de alimento, están recibiendo asistencia pública. Ese fue el primer grupo. El segundo grupo fue las personas que están recibiendo Medicaid de HRA. Esas fueron el segundo grupo de personas que recibieron esta clase de beneficios de PEBT de parte del Estado. Y el último grupo que está por recibir esos beneficios son personas que tienen niños estudiando en el Departamento de Educación. Entonces, si no han recibido los beneficios de PEBT y no han recibido una carta del Estado que les dice que esos beneficios ya le fueron entregados o se le van a ser entregados, estas familias lo que necesitan hacer es llamar a un número de teléfono que es del Estado y preguntar para cuándo van a estar recibiendo esos beneficios. Entonces, le repito, esos beneficios no son administrados por mi agencia, esos beneficios vienen directamente del Estado. Sí podemos ver si nosotros, desde nuestro punto de vista, si ya fueron mandados a las familias, pero nosotros no tenemos control de esos beneficios. Entonces, si no han recibido esos beneficios y quieren preguntarse para cuándo los van a recibir, llamen a este número que es el 833-452-0096. Ellos están abiertos de las 8:30 de la mañana hasta las 5 de la tarde, de lunes a viernes. Y también existe un correo electrónico, pero es un poquito largo. Entonces voy a tratar no sé si Carolina, ¿quieres que lo ponga yo aquí en el chat y las familias lo pueden coger o lo digo en voz alta?
Sí, ponlo en el chat y yo lo pongo ahorita en el banner también.
Ok, perfecto.
Si lo tienes ahí.
Sí. ¿Y la otra pregunta cuál era?
La otra pregunta era sobre creo que era sobre la aplicación que hizo el Estado, que mencionó el gobernador Cuomo, si es la misma de Access NYC.
Dame un segundo, estoy escribiendo esto.
Y mientras Vanessa hace eso,
Sí.
nosotros pusimos en nuestras redes sociales, en Instagram y en Facebook de NYC Kids Rise, la información sobre el Pandemic EBT. Y ahí ahorita voy a volver a poner el número y el email que pueden llamar para verificar.
Ahí está el correo electrónico al que pueden
Sí, ya lo voy a
escribirle para
poner.
preguntarle dónde, para cuándo están recibiendo sus beneficios. Hay dos websites que se utilizan para aplicar para beneficios públicos. Uno es el Access NYC. Ese website, ese sitio web es un sitio web muy general donde las familias pueden visitarlo y ver qué clase de beneficios ellos califican. Muchas veces ahí pueden darse cuenta si califican para sección 8 o para que su renta pueda ser congelada por parte de... Hay un programa que se llama SCREE y otro programa que se llama DREE, que son unas siglas en inglés que permiten a las familias en congelar su renta si viven en unos ciertos edificios. Y ese programa es administrado por el Departamento de Finanzas aquí de la ciudad de Nueva York. Nuestro sitio web, que es Access HRA, es donde las familias pueden aplicar para los beneficios que HRA tiene. Entonces son dos diferentes sitios web, pero Access HRA es donde ellos pueden ir, crear una cuenta, no se necesita un correo electrónico, pueden crear una cuenta sin un correo electrónico y una vez que entran a Access HRA existen diferentes aplicaciones para diferentes beneficios, ya sea para cupones de alimentos, si es que están interesados en ese beneficio solamente, pueden aplicar para ese beneficio solamente. Si están interesados en recibir asistencia pública, existe una aplicación para eso, o para Medicaid, si es que son personas de la mayor edad o si tienen una discapacidad. Y también pueden aplicar para la asistencia de emergencia que les había comentado, para pagar renta atrasada o para pagar recibos de gas o de luz que no han podido pagar en su totalidad o que se han retrasado por motivo de que han perdido sus ingresos. Entonces, estas aplicaciones están ahí en Access HRA y cuando nosotros empezamos a procesar las aplicaciones vamos a requerir ciertos documentos como una identificación oficial, el Social Security Card si ellos lo tienen, comprobante de domicilio y el recibo de luz o de gas de Con Edison o National Grid. Y para hacernos llegar esos documentos, ellos pueden tomarle simplemente una foto a los documentos y mandarlos por el medio de una aplicación que se llama Access HRA App, que lo pueden buscar en Google y ahí mismo pueden bajar la aplicación si tienen un smartphone. Le toman una foto y entonces pueden mandarnos sus documentos por medio del app. Entonces no tienen que tener ninguna clase de interacción en un centro, no tienen que salir de su casa, lo pueden hacer todo desde la comodidad de sus casas.
Gracias, Vanessa. Y nosotros vamos a poner ese enlace de Access HRA en los comentarios para que lo tengan y después haremos una nota en Facebook para que vean todos los recursos que compartimos durante este foro. Muchas gracias a todos. Gracias, Vanessa. Gracias, Joel. Nuestro próximo foro virtual será el 17 de septiembre a las 6 de la tarde. Y recuerden, si no han tomado los siguientes pasos en el Safe for College Program, contáctenos para asistirlos y le contestaremos cualquier pregunta que tenga, en qué parte del programa se encuentra y cómo pueden incrementar sus ahorros para el futuro de sus hijos. Aquí está nuestra información, el 833-543-7473 y nuestro email es info@nychkidSRISE.org. Nos puede escribir, llamar y síganos en las redes sociales. Vanessa y Joel, gracias. No se desconecten mientras nosotros terminamos esto. Buenas noches y que pasen bien. Gracias por acompañarnos.
Buenas noches.
Igualmente. Buenas noches.